Origin Someone reaction. This is Rome's first assassination. Whoops. History hijinks. Okay. Yeah, so first of all, can we appreciate for a moment that Roman Empire is so old and yet we even have the accounts for the first ever assassination. Obviously, it's the first assassination ever recorded, but still, this is like thousands of years old and we still have the account. This is fucking awesome. So yeah, I know some, I guess I can say some of Roman history. Why not? Better after all these fucking videos. So yeah, let's watch it. Obviously, I'm not gonna know about this, but anything around it, hopefully I'll know it. I don't know. But Rome is such a complex topic that something like history of civilization, gardens, even OSP's lots of videos, history videos I haven't seen about other people. I only know the famous accounts mostly, right? Emperors and things. But yeah, let's watch it.
I've been making a lot of videos about ancient Rome in the last few months, and there are 3 good reasons for that. Well, 3 reasons. Good might be a stretch. First and most obvious is that I really enjoy this stuff, and you all seem to as well. Rome is a fascinating civilization that offers us a wealth of topics to investigate as we celebrate their accomplishments and then revel in the dramatic irony as the cracks start appearing. Second, I had a form of long COVID earlier this year that sapped the old brain box for a few months, and I needed to work in familiar territory as I recuperated. On that note, please, dear God, stay up to date on your inoculations and remember your flu shots too. And third, but most importantly, it is currently the season of fall, and I will guiltlessly run this joke into the ground until we get to winter. So, as we wind down our season of Rome, let's also wind down the Roman Republic.
Okay, why is Roman Greek history mythology so fun? Because they are the literal daily soap of history. Whatever you see of Rome, even the Greeks, it's just fucking incredible. You will never get bored. If you want to hook people up on history, tell them the Roman and Greek histories, basically.
Starting what will become a lengthy and interminably painful trend, Roman civil wars. In latter centuries, these hooligans got it down to a science, but today we'll topple the first domino and introduce Rome to the concept of political assassination. To see how this can't possibly go wrong, let's do some history. By the mid-100s BC, Rome had become rather adept at exporting violence. In 146, it capped the Punic War trilogy by burning the city of Carthage to the ground. Meanwhile, that very same year, the Roman army plundered, ransacked, destroyed, murdered, and/or enslaved every man, woman, child, and artifact in the city of Corinth to complete their conquest of Greece. This was a banger year for Rome's cartographers, who had the happy task of painting a beautiful shade of red all across Greece and North Africa, but it was a mixed bag at best for the new subjects, not citizens, who lived there. Violence was a key ingredient of Roman statecraft abroad, and with such a thin line between the military and political establishments, we shouldn't be surprised when someone applies that same thinking to local politics. Oh no! With that foreboding preamble out of the way, let's meet the Gracchi brothers. Members of the lower plebeian class, these boyos were sons of a consul and general, as well as the maternal grandsons of the great general Scipio Africanus himself. During his political career, the elder brother Tiberius set about reforming land rights to be more egalitarian. The plan was that no one could own more than half a square mile of the public lands acquired by the state during wars. Notably, a lot of public land was recently acquired by the state during wars. His idea was to partition all that out in small lots for the poorer citizens, so that everyone, well, actually not everyone, but all the citizens had a farm and livelihood to call their own. The thing is, a version of this law had already been in place since 367 BC, but nobody enforced it, so wealthy Romans and generals gobbled up loads of public land during recent conquests. Naturally, the reason this law was ignored was the same reason Tiberius would have so much trouble getting it back on the books. Rome's old moneyest citizens tended to be senators, who had plenty to lose from a law that capped a considerable source of their family wealth. But
You know what I like is that they basically did this, like these are not citizens, they are subjects and they don't get the same rights and whatever basically that we do. They did that so the citizens of Rome can actually back people for conquest, right? You want to go to conquest, you want to spend money, you want to go to war, so put all soldiers there. Why? Because we'll benefit from it. They are going to be our subjects. They are not going to we're going to benefit more than they'll benefit, basically. And I like how basically seeing this, right? Like how all the political shenanigans here. What weird thing is, if you see any US Congress or anything, all the shit that happens there, right? That you can see some element of it in here, right? In Roman politics, and how basically everybody just imported screaming at each other, do all the different shenanigans. Only difference is there more violence here, right? Oh, look at that. This guy killed this guy for political. Yeah, I guess that happens. That's the only difference. Otherwise, you see a lot of similarities.
Tiberius was not a senator himself. Rather, in 133 BC, he held the office of tribune. In centuries past, this was the only office available to the lower plebeian class, but generations of reforms and good old-fashioned bullying eroded the social, political, and financial barriers between patricians and plebeians. And as a result, the tribune was no slouch, having the authority to veto many government actions and upper magistrates. Tiberius' own father used this veto to save Scipio Africanus from a sham bribery trial back in the 180s BC, which is supposedly why Scipio's daughter was swiftly betrothed into the Gracchi family. That particular sidebar will remain unexplored, but the relevant point is how Rome's weaponized gridlock pressured the Senate to act in the interests of the plebeians. Except this time, as Tiberius pushed his legislation through the plebeian assembly, the senators pressured an aristocratic-leaning tribune to veto it. This was legal, but had never been done before, and despite Tiberius's requests, neither the Senate nor the other tribune would budge. So Tiberius took a similarly unprecedented step and had the other guy deposed, voiding his veto and then finally passing the reforms with him and his family in charge of divvying up the plots to landless citizens. Now, with all that done, even for the Romans who liked these reforms, that last bit was a little shifty. A frivolous veto was one thing, but deposing a tribune and then passing a law with blatant conflicts of interests made Tiberius look dangerous. And just like that, Rome's proto-socialist fave became problematic. Honestly, the political machinations at play here are a fascinating showcase of how Romans began breaking constitutional customs.
Yeah, see, you can have all the ambition in the world, but you cannot go against the wave. If you're not in the, what is the favor of the citizens, if you go against that, right, and just have your ambition and, try to enforce that, you will make more enemies of people than you would like, basically. So I can see where the assassination is coming around.
Before they got to outright breaking the Republic. But let's not get off track. I promised you a body count, so here is the fun part. Fearing persecution once he left office, Tiberius took another unprecedented step of running for a consecutive second term as tribune, which his opponents interpreted as a tyrannical power grab on top of his existential threat to their wealth. Unfortunately for them, the land reform was popular, and Tiberius' enemies in the Senate figured he would win his re-election for tribune, so the Pontifex Maximus and several senators went over to the assembly with the intent to cause a ruckus and stop the vote counting. But the ensuing scuffle got out of hand, and without any weapons, they grabbed what was available and subsequently beat Tiberius to death with clubs and chairs. As we'll see later, stabbing Caesar with knives was one thing, but using chairs? Now that's a full-body workout. That takes intent and a good deal of persistence. Seriously. This was the first time the Roman instinct for violence had turned inward and spilled into Republican politics, and with that blood...
Can we take a moment and really process that? Like, it's like you're gonna kill somebody with a chair. How much effort it requires and how long it takes to do that. I mean, what type of hate is in your mind that you just, knife or something, just like 1, 2, and there you go. But with a chair, you have to repeatedly, just bang, bang, bang. That's just too gruesome, isn't it?
Blood-red lines so spectacularly crossed, boy oh boy, it would not be the last. Frankly, the senators were already in too deep to just go home and change, so they proceeded to kill another 300 of Gracchus's supporters, thus introducing the concept of political martyrdom and removing any prejudice against the expediency of assassination. Now, with that point made, I mentioned Tiberius had a brother. That would be Gaius, and his story is... well, let's see for ourselves. Gaius was unfazed by his brother's grisly demise and embarked on even more aggressive reforms when he became tribune in 123. These new policies included redoing the provincial tax system so income went back to Rome instead of the governors, then using that new revenue to offer low-priced wheat for the Roman people. Elsewhere, he cut down on bribery in the courts and stopped the Senate from playing favorites with consuls. Gaius's consistent strategy was to prevent senatorial corruption by elevating the equestrian class to advisory positions and oversight roles in the Republic. Far more daring than Tiberius's little old land laws, this thicko slate of reforms touched nearly every level of government, from revenue to public programs and courts to consuls, so it could only be passed with big help. Gaius allied with the equestrians, offering them new authority and prestige in exchange for passing those laws to help the poor and make the Republic run smoother. That all sounds good and noble, but let's remember that Gaius's brother was f***ing assassinated, so the man justifiably held a grudge. To that end, he limited the Senate's power to prosecute without the Assembly's consent and forbade anyone deposed by the Assembly from holding any other office. On paper, that's a power grab for the assembly, but those are also just reasonable laws, so despite all the reasons the Senate hated him, he remained extremely popular with the Roman people, securing a second consecutive term as tribune in 122. But it's here that Gaius played himself.
Yeah, he was smart. Gaius was really smart. He saw what happened to his brother, and basically from there he just made sure that that shit doesn't happen. Because let's be honest, the problem here was the Senate kind of got, a bit more, they saw that their profit is going or something. So he basically just made sure the Senate doesn't have the same power as they did before. And I like how in this one, like certain body of people who are in charge of Senate at the time, people don't say like, oh, these are the assholes. No, they literally say like, oh, Senate is the assholes. I see that a lot in Rome, right? Vilifying the whole body of something like Senate, right? Not the people who are leading at that time, because people come and go, right? He's just like, okay, Senate did this. Senate killed my brother. The whole Senate is fucked.
By raising the question of citizenship. Essentially, Rome was Rome and proper Romans were citizens, but outside of Rome, the Latin-speaking population weren't citizens and the other Italians in the peninsula had even fewer rights than the Latins. Gaius sensed widespread discontent among these allied non-citizens and figured he could win them over by giving Latin rights to free Italians and making the Latins into full citizens. One could imagine how such a grateful new voting bloc would happily elect Gaius into everything forever, but while this solution was rather clever, it was intensely unpopular with every class of citizen in Rome. So the measure.
There you go. See, that's the one I was talking about. The first day, the Roman citizens themselves are going to be pissed because they do all this shit so they can convince Roman citizens like we should conquer more and more. We'll benefit. They'll have less rights. You'll have more. But now, if you do this, right, and make sure the Latins are now Romans, Italians are now Latins, and just move them up the food chain. They like it that, context said, like, we're not special. So they are going to be issue now.
Popularity plummeted across the board despite his astounding reforms, and he handily lost his next election for tribune. Wait, hold on. This isn't an assassination. This is just realpolitik. Damn it. Wait. There's another page. Oh, yeah. Okay, here we go. So, one of Gaius's pet policies was setting up new colonies of Roman citizens in Carthage and Italy, so that proper Romans had a place to live in these shiny new provinces they killed so many people to get. But the new tribune proposed to dissolve these colonies, so Gaius triggered illegal protests about it, and in the ensuing scuffles, one of Gaius's supporters was killed. The Senate, horrified at the uproar, feared a classic Gracchi brothers power grab, so they passed the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, an ultimate decree branding Gaius and his allies as enemies of the state and granting themselves the authority to strategically unalive them. And thus the senators partied like it's 133 BC. Gaius and his gang fortified themselves atop the Aventine Hill, so the consul raised a mob and brought soldiers within the city walls to go slash their way up. Sources differ on the details, as is tradition, but Gaius had likely fallen on his own sword by the time the Senate found him. So technically, he specifically was not actually assassinated. However, 3,000 of his supporters were absolutely murdered to death during
That's a big-ass number, man. Those numbers just get thrown out of fuck it. Like, holy shit, 100,000, who cares? It's so fucked up. The problem with Senate is like in today's democratic worlds, right, whether it's Senate, Congress basically, they basically learned from all this shit, right? And that's how the laws and restrictions are put in, like what can a Senate do, what can some body of government can do, right? Because before this, right, Senate is using people, just like how lots of kings and emperors use the god. Like God decree this and just start to dictate things. That's how kings and emperors used to do. In Rome, Senate used to dictate through people. Like people are the one who put us in charge. We are doing this from instead of the people because we are the people, right? People put us in charge to enact their will. So they basically do lots of shit like this, declare anybody enemy of the state, attack them for their own benefit, but show them that this is what people want because we are elected from the people. So just like how emperors use God, Senate used people to basically dictate things and become a board in itself that became this kind of a fucked up thing that just, we kind of see that today, right? Congress and Senate do something that is not people want, but they say like this, we are doing this for the people or whatever because we elected by the people. But in Rome, it happened at a ridiculous degree.
after the riot, and that handy purge left a template for targeted political violence that later Romans would be all too eager to follow. In the years after, nearly all of Gaius's laws were repealed, but the Republic could not escape him throughout its last century. His defining reforms remained highly contentious, and the political violence of his term became frighteningly commonplace. Decades later, the issue of citizenship erupted into the Social War in 91 BC, ending with all Italians getting full citizenship but nearly toppling the entire Roman state in the process. Meanwhile, the equestrian class benefited immensely from Gaius's reforms, taking on vast new powers with none of the checks or customs that kept the Senate at least nominally in line. The Roman Republic didn't collapse overnight, and the worst of its civil wars was yet to come, several times over, but the reforms, political battles, and violent deaths of the Gracchi brothers made it far easier to be bad, and that was a temptation the Romans absolutely did not need. And thus will unfold the great mishap of antiquity, as nobody could kick Rome's ass like Rome. Thank you so much for watching.
That's so true, right? Rome's biggest enemy has always been Rome, because everybody else couldn't do shit, right? By the end, we like to say like barbarians and, basically tribes killed Rome, but not really. They killed themselves, right? I thought the Huns are going to be the eight, but no, Huns didn't do shit. They just walked away, right? Aquila died, right? Aquila, that's his name, yeah. So Romans were their own enemy. That's the problem. But yeah. All right, well, if you like my next one, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.